Welcome everyone to another edition of the Paradime live stream. So this time we decided we'd take a slightly different topic to talk about. So far, most of our live streams have been focused on new capabilities and products that we have shipped as part of the Paradime platform, as part of our Cursor for Data AI experience. But this time we thought that we speak about the application of how all of these things comes together from day to day from a product standpoint. So today we are not going to talk about anything from a product feature standpoint, but what we wanted to chat today is that how you can actually build data pipelines for various different use cases. And one of the use cases that we are going to talk about today is how we at Paradime used Paradime as well as various other tools and applications to build this end-to-end data pipeline for AI activation, because I think it will illustrate how we can stitch together various different applications, either within Bolt or within the Paradime Code ID. But effectively, what we expect is that the listener, you would go away thinking, okay, the data pipelines are no longer being used to just do data transformation. The scope for data pipelines is a much broader than it used to be in the past, because nowadays every application that is showing some sort of data in an embedded form needs a data pipeline underneath. Every AI company needs to run data pipeline underneath their application. And this is one example of how that sort of capabilities can be unlocked using an application, using various different techniques. So having said that, I think it's going to be a bit of a discussion. I think, Fabio, you've got some great stuff prepared for this. So yeah, stage is yours. Let's kick this off.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaustav. Yes. I'm super excited to be this time here talking about what we've been building internally, and there's definitely a little bit of how we use Paradime for it, but it is a lot around conceptually on what kind of infrastructure we decide to implement, why we decided to ultimately choose certain infrastructure and certain tools. So hopefully this will resonate, that will be helpful for the viewer here. So I think one of the key challenges, of course, as a startup that we are part of, is that we don't have unlimited resources. So actually it's just me in the data team. I'm still writing SQL and still building things for us for internal products. Jumping in on sort of like, why did we have to come up with such infrastructure and such work that we've been doing is, so Paradime, we wanted to bring more visibility in terms of how teams are using the product. And really one important thing is that with Paradime, we build in Dynamo. It is helping user massively to deploy code faster at scale, using AI to generate codes and documentation, all these amazing things that AI supports in some of those workflows. But what we realize is that the user had a sort of like a blind spot, which is fundamentally we do so many different things throughout our days, and AI is just kind of like multiplying that. So I'm pretty sure if we ask ourselves, like, what did we use Chat for last week? What did we use Claude for last week? I'm sure that a lot of people will think about, well, I did a lot of things, but what kind of value I got? So there was this fundamental problem. It's kind of like hard to remember almost, because things are so fast. It's almost hard to remember what did we use certain features and where did we see value and how we actually gain value for some of those applications. So we had three fundamental problems. One is that, user did not know how they were using AI, but didn't know how and where, right? So that was one. More importantly, from a manager standpoint, like we ultimately have to justify why we pick one tool over another. So one of the things we wanted to solve is that how can we provide a report to a manager or a buyer of Paradime so they can at a glance see very quickly how their teams are performing, how they are benefiting from some of the features than our products provide, and ultimately justify the ROI and the investment on our product, right? So we wanted to make that simple. I guess customer research and talking with customer, we realized, and actually people need this. At the end of the day, you can get X amount of resources to deploy a tool, but at some point you'll have to justify why you're getting this, or if you need to buy more seats, like why do you need that? But also we wanted to have internally from ourselves and for the user a way to solve this problem of activation, not necessarily only from us, but also themselves. So our manager should have a place where they can go and see out of my team, some users are power users, some users are kind of like not really adopting certain technologies. So how can we get the power user to lead the pack and kind of like help them understand, help those users and the lagger be more productive, right? So fundamentally, these were the three main problems we wanted to solve. And more importantly, what we had to do was build a data pipeline that could scale with us. What I mean by this is that, okay, I'm a one-man data person in the team. I still write SQL. I enjoy writing SQL, but I also have other things to do. One of the things was, okay, how can we build this system so that now in 3 months, 6 months, a year, it scales with our customers and I don't have to go and retouch and modify things too much because that's going to take time. So yeah, so these are sort of like the kind of the three main topic and what we want to solve. So I'll jump now on the next slide. So we're going to spend a bit of time here, but fundamentally, this is our infrastructure. This is how we build this whole end-to-end data pipeline to solve this problem. Now, starting from the left, there is like a few things, and of course, we have to ingest data. Where is this data coming from? Well, we have Stripe and Auth0 as a cloud SaaS provider that we need to understand which plan a certain company is on, what kind of subscription they have. Or we have to connect to the right part, to the right team or the right plan, right? So all this kind of metadata that has to pull through Stripe and then Auth0 because it's one of our provider in terms of authentication login. So we need to understand, did the user even log in the platform in the first place, right? And for this, we use, Fivetran and DLT to manage the ingestion for us. And the Paradime infrastructure works in a way, then each of our customers gets their own databases. So this is a very interesting problem that we had to solve because you will need to aggregate the data at some point for various different metrics. And we needed to push all these data into BigQuery. We sort of like explored various different techniques, data transfer on RDS to BigQuery. Didn't work out well at the end. As your customer grows and scales, then you do have a problem, which is you start having many data sets, one data set per customer. You need to end up doing a bunch of union that you don't want to do. There's a point in time when you're going to, and we eat that, which was a limited number of character in a SQL query, right? Like I don't write a union, but at some point you're going to get that. So
I remember, right? Like we had such a large union block that at some point BigQuery says that you cannot have more than this many characters in a query. So BigQuery won't be able to even run it. So we've seen people like who try to kind of concatenate data across all their customers and that's never a good strategy because at some point the SQL just becomes too large. Even if you use a macro, it will still unfurl into a big SQL, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's famous our table where we're uniting data. Ultimately, the SQL itself was probably, or the DBT code rather, was maybe like 50, 100 lines, right? But then that had a various different macro that will make sure that we'll adapt the SQL on the fly. The whole thing was maybe 4,000 or 5,000 lines, and we'll get, so like every time we get a new customer, that union will get a new entry, and over time, it'll just grow out of any way that could be manageable to a point that we actually got in one of our production job and say, hey, you reached the number of character, figure out a better way, pretty much. So that was an interesting one. We didn't want to have, also a Python script that will duplicate the code and then write into like an individual table, like trying to hack things together that way, because fundamentally you end up having the exactly same SQL code across multiple DBT model. Again, problem that it wouldn't scale with us, right? So what we decided to go with is to actually use PeerDB, which is a great tool that allows us to solve these problems. So PeerDB allows us to do CDC and listen to each of our customer databases in RDS and fundamentally insert in an almost near streaming fashion data into BigQuery. And that was a big improvement because right now it means that we don't have to worry about if it's one new customer, 10 customer, 20 customer, the infrastructure just take care of itself. We're still going to get, one table at the end of the day for analytics purposes that track certain activities for users in our databases. And then, of course, Segment is always there, I think. And it's all about, tracking events and how users are actually interacting with our platform. We're looking, I'm not going to talk too much about the top level part because we have an example later on how these gets orchestrated together, but Paradime help us with Bolt to orchestrate this end-to-end. if you look at the next step there, which is where the data sits in BigQuery, the way how we structure our analytics platform is we have 3 separate BigQuery projects, an ingestion project where all the data lands from all these different services upstream. We then take that source data, we transform it, and that goes into its own dbt or BigQuery project. And already there, we use dbt, of course, to write that, and Paradime to iterate, and then we use Vertex. So what we do is fundamentally using Vertex AI, not only do like a simple kind of like SQL transformation, but actually use some of those built-in AI capabilities and BigQuery provide, and we know Snowflake is doing similar things and Databricks. So I think it's pretty great to see those data warehouse provided, and now make it so easy to adopt or build AI pipelines and normalizations and summarizations and classification. All these things are just so easy to build right now, and we leverage that. And then we have a presentation layer. So this is where fundamentally we expose subset of our data after being transformed for various different sort of like goal. One of it is to expose this inside our application. Here, a couple of things around how did we go about this? Like, what was the slight decision behind it? So we looked at, so we had, maybe take a step back. So we wanted to solve one very, very specific thing from a semantic layer perspective, which was we wanted to make it so that the maintenance of new metric and how we could expose that in our application will be as low as possible. That means that we didn't want to write different case statement, filtering data on the front end. We didn't want to do that. I think it would have been just, again, a problem of scale. And also we wanted to build this in a way so that it will be extremely secure. So there will be no way then somebody is in one, like one customer in one place could access in any other way, like somebody else's data somewhere else, right? So of course, this is kind of like a given, but it's super important for us. So we look at various different kind of like provider, and fundamentally we decided to go into Cube, and there are a few reasons why we ultimately decided to use Cube for it. So the first one, and I think it's pretty important, is that it's fully open source, which means that we can host Cube ourselves. We can use Cube Cloud for it if we don't want to manage resources, but fundamentally give us that flexibility that if at any time we wanted to not be locked in, we could, right? So that was one. The second thing, which was also important, we wanted to have a lot of flexibility on the sort of like API layer or API access around it. So how do we actually go and query this data through the semantic layer? And I think what Cube is pretty great at it is that it actually provides everything you want. So you want to query your cubes through a graphical endpoint, you can. You want to use REST API, you can. You want to use the SQL API, you can. So it's super flexible because it means that we can actually choose then to push the same metrics in various different so like application, right? And that's exactly what we do. So we use the graphical endpoints to feed the semantics models and metrics inside our application. We'll see an example of how do we use exactly this. But also because Cube has a very extensive integration layer, we actually use also this in Hex. So again, it creates this single source of truth where the same metric can be queried from inside our application or from our own internal analysis and report it through X, which is the tool we use. So a couple of things that sort of like Cube allows us to do was they have this concept of query write, which means that we can pass a JWT token on the fly, and the query gets modified on the fly based on the user who is actually logged in the application. So again, super secure to actually query gets written. From a front-end perspective of like our front-end developer, they actually have to just sort of like chain the queries and feed those into the right chart, but they don't have to worry about filtering because that's actually happening on the lowest level as possible, right? So again, scalability and ease of use, I don't think our front-end engineers should even care about it. They'll just like, this is the endpoint, you have to display this data here, and they should just take care of that.
Yeah, like the whole API and like everything we apply like almost like row level security, and then all of it is managed through the backend So ultimately what front end gets is the data for that organization, for that user, right? So the front end doesn't even know, and it has no way of even knowing. As a result, it's just filtered out at pretty early in the process.
That's right. Yeah. And I think the other thing, which is also like powerful, is that Cube comes with out of the box with this concept of environments, right? Which means that, again, when we will have to go through a release cycle all the time. So I make changes to a cube, then in our dev environment or our application, we should be able to feed that. So we can kind of keep all these things in sync without DevOps overhead. Like who has time and who actually likes to do these things anyway? It's not to fight like anyone's time to spend on trying to hook all these things together. So Cube gave us a lot of these out of the box. And the other thing, which personally I think is extremely important when we look at semantic layer and metrics and so on, is that there are always two main use cases. Internal use cases, we want to create a single source of truth, which are great. But then there is also the point that we will be not as Paradime the main consumer, but our customer will be consuming the data through our application. And it kind of like poses a very interesting challenge, right? Which is, how do we know if a query is fast or slow? Are we caching the right thing? Like how do we get that, right? And this was definitely one of the, I guess, the key decision point for us on which framework to pick and which tool to pick from a semantic layer standpoint. It's like we needed visibility. We needed to know exactly when something is slow, why it is slow, being able to access and sort of like replay that query within a different environment, understand, is it because we are not caching, we're not pre-aggregating, is it a BigQuery problem, or is it somewhere within the Cube instance itself, right? And I think Cube, it's excel massively at that. Regularly go and check what is slow and what is fast, and then collect that uptime.
We've had examples, right? We would launch a query, then you would see that the latency is a bit too high. And then I remember like you then explore the query and then you find like, okay, in BigQuery, in the SQL query itself, there are some optimizations and indexations and different strategy you can use, or look at the query plan. But all of that essentially comes from getting notified in the queue, in the semantic layer, that when certain query is slow or how it is performing. I think if you are using APIs for data applications, having logging and monitoring is table stakes, because otherwise your end users will say, hey, the in-app dashboard is slow, but then what happens afterwards?
Totally, yeah, and I think it's crucial actually, right? Because it's different when you are building your own local dashboard to power your sales team. Not that they don't deserve a fast experience, but it's kind of like internal to your organization, right? But like people will complain, you'll get to know, somebody will tell you, but you won't lose them as customer, right? But for when we're looking into exposing or embedding analytics experiences within that, people will pay for it. They're paying for this feature. You need to find a way to be on top of it as much as possible, of understanding performance without, hopefully without going to get a Slack message and say why this dashboard is slow, right? Because when you get it from a product perspective, you're already on the back foot at that point. So we wanted to make sure that we'll have enough visibility, alerting, and control. But also we wanted to have a lot of flexibility on the deployment side, and that, if we needed to increase resources, it wouldn't take us going to AWS and managing your own infrastructure for this. So Cube Cloud was great. And I think it was a great choice for us as we move into this layer. Then, as I said, the add-on is that, okay, it does connect to Hex in a similar way using the same Cube endpoints, which means that I can, if a customer is asking a question about, in this case, we're looking at AI pipeline, but we use Cube also to power other metrics within the embedded analytics experience we have. I'm able to actually go and look at the exact same numbers and the user is using through Hex, right? So I can look at similar metrics and basically I can see what the user is saying, and I don't have to kind of rethink about how the query is structured and rewrite it myself, right? So kind of brings that consistency there. So yeah, super powerful like software to handle these experiences for embedded analytics and of course your own reporting layer. Then the other piece here was around the other part, which is, what about people that are not in our application, right? We still want to send them something. We still want to let them know these are the metrics. This is how the teams is using AI within our platform. So we probably, it's like half through the year, this year or early in the year, we decided to simplify a little bit how we can manage external communication ultimately with Paradime. Think of changelog and all these sort of things, and we send regularly to our customers. But Loops also provide the ability to use transaction emails, right? So what we do is we take the same data that has been ingested, transformed to dbt, enriched and filtered and summarized through Vertex AI and Gemini in our case. That's the one that we're trying. But the beauty of, I guess, the beauty of Gemini and BigQuery is that they kind of like have this concept of I think I call a model garden, where you can actually experiment super quickly within our pipeline and see which model performed best, right? And there's a lot of aggregation, there's a lot of data, so you have to find a balance between speed and output quality, input token, output tokens. All these things have to come together. And with Paradime, then with Bolt, what we do is we effectively call a REST API endpoint to send these transaction emails on a regular basis to the users. And we'll see an example of that. But fundamentally, then what happens is that regularly there are dashboards that are powered inside our application that expose these metrics and these summaries that we generate through AI and this filtered data. But a part of that also gets sent by email. So on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, user will receive some sort of reports of how they've been using this feature. What are the things and their benefit out of it? What are the things they can actually use to be more productive, right? How do they compare with other teams, right? So we do all these things in there. And this is fundamentally like end-to-end lineage, if you like, of how the data goes from one place to another one and how we power those experiences there. So there are a couple of things I want to show you now, which is one, I guess, like an example of what is this AI SQL looks like, right? Like how this actually been constructed there. So let me just switch to the other slide here. Okay, here we go. Cool, awesome. So this is a real example, okay, of an actual SQL query we use with Vertex AI to generate. In this case, we're using AI generate. There are also AI classify and ifs and a few others. But what I think is pretty good about it is that what this allows us to do is to compose dynamic prompt, right? So what we have is actual text. It is a concat function, basically. And inside the concat function, there's like a combination of system prompt plus actual data. Then we feed from our pipeline so that this whole summary is super personalized for the user, for the company all the time, right? So we can add all the different conditions. Of course, you have a scenario where maybe you don't have data from the previous month, right? Or maybe there are certain things they're missing. Like you want to handle all these things so that the summary is as good as it can be using AI, right? So you can define instructions, of course, performance tier, then comes from the column, then how this was calculated before through SQL, how trend analysis should be done, what is the styling requirement we want to have, what are the considerations. I think those are things that are super important. Like, okay, if you're declining in the adoption, be nice and empathetic and try to think about solution rather than just tell the user like, hey, you haven't used this feature at all, right? If it's the first time, based on the data we've seen, and this is the first time or the first month or the first week the user has done anything with that AI or the product, okay, set expectation of what this is about, like what they can do, right? And then I think the favorite one, and this prompt took some time to and figure out how it will work best, which is a monthly executive summary, make it insightful, actionable, and worth reading, and not just a data recap, right? So we don't want to send people like, hey, this is what you've done. It's like, yeah, that's great, but what next, right? So we build the prompt and we build this pipeline in a way so it does suggest best actions, recommendations, actual actionable facts that the user can take away. And this, what you see, connection, the endpoint is a very specific BigQuery configuration, but this basically allows us to, because they're using variables, to easily flick through whichever LM we want to pick, right? So if now I wanted to go in and say, actually, I don't want to use Gemini 2.5, I want to use 3.0 because this is now, it's greater, it's better, whatever. I have one single place. And so I can go in our DBT project and choose like switch to this other endpoint or connection, and then it's kind of good to go. So there are many places where we use this. This is just an example of how the SQL get constructor in there. In all this, I guess, how does actually this looks like, right? So how does it look like inside application? So there are a few things that we do. So the first one is this one here. So you see on the left, we have this kind of like top level dashboards that the user can use. We show them various different metrics about activities and how they use the application in a certain area. What you see on the right, they're actually real example of what this AI summarization looks like, right? So we can say, okay, your organization is amongst the leading using that AI. This is your usage rate, growth trajectory. So what kind of activities you're having, how users are actually generating or using AI for it. So this is, for example, here we have SQL development and DBT documentation and testing, right? These are great metrics, but fundamentally it's like we give you as much as possible this sort of intel. And you can access this at any time inside the application. You can look at previous month, all these things are there. So this is sort of like one layer of what we saw at the end of the pipeline on the right. The other one, which we go now, is getting insight on the end of user, right? So on the left, this is an example of a part, or like a kind of the top level of the email that we send, the one at the email we sent. Again, this is reusing the same semantic queries, semantic models. We push this thing through email on a regular basis so that, again, users have top level metric and insight about how their team are performing, how they've been performing. They can actually take actions on the back of that as well. They can go back into application with more suggestion. But this fundamentally allows us to iterate and customize all these different email based on different account, based on which plan they're on. So it gives a lot of flexibility. And look, it's pretty powerful that it's like a very simple way to write email in the same way as you will write a Notion doc, which I think is great. So I guess the next thing is how does this, how do we orchestrate now all this, right? It's actually super simple. So we use Paradime for that and Bolt, which is our orchestrator. So we actually have two simple jobs, nothing more than that for this specific use case. One, which is managing the Fivetran sync for us. So through Paradime, we connect to Fivetran, we integrate with it, and we choose when we should trigger a sync in Fivetran. And then we have our DBT snapshot and our DBT run. And this sort of like takes care of transforming all the data that we have so that it can be consumed inside the application, but also that it can be consumed to send through this additional data through email, right? And that's the second part, which is around the activation piece and how we send this out. So the first thing we do, we do have another job within Bolt, which is like test and validate and checks that all the data, it's set in a way that we want it to be for this data to be sent out by email. And then we use Poetry to manage our environments and again, being able to run Python directly from Paradime itself. And so like triggering these APIs to loops to send these additional emails so that only a subset of user will get this email based on the type of email content we have, right? So we can have a lot of flexibility. In this case, is an example of a monthly AI summary.
So we are running two separate pipelines. One is ingesting Fivetran data, running DBT transformation, and then executing the AI functions. Then we have another pipeline, but that basically is running all the data transformation, and now we have all the data in March. And now we have a second pipeline, which is running tests, running validations, and then using Python is executing the transaction email API, and that is sending all the activation emails to the end users at a certain cadence.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
And it keeps things very simple, right? In the sense that on the back of these, we get different alerts internally to us via Slack. So if there's something, that goes wrong on the Fivetran side, for example, we'll get alerted. If it goes on the DBT layer, we'll get alerted. And also, of course, the key thing is that the summary, it cannot go out unless all the tests for that specific summary have passed successfully, right? So kind of trying to, of course, not getting a state and we send an email out and it's blank or there's some weird numbers in there. So that's how we build it internally. Now, why Paradime Bolt? Well, again, a small team. We don't want to handle infrastructure. It has native integration with Fivetran, Airby, dlthub. We'll see on the right. Paradime allows us to trigger many different tools on the back of it. Again, observability, logs, monitoring, alerts, those are all part of it. And on top of that, through the Dynamo agent, we're able to also send this kind of like summarized logs and back to Slack here. So it might be that, I'm not around and, there's a failure. Well, somebody can actually pick up that failure directly from Slack and fix it. So, we build it ourselves as well. So why would you pick something else in a way? But it's again, like, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to look at any orchestration day to day. It just has to run. And what I want to know is just has to run regularly. And if it doesn't, I want to know how I can get and fix it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think previously Fivetran would just run or air.dl. Ingestion would run by itself, transformation would run by itself, and so on. But here, by being able to couple the right commands one after another and just sequencing it properly means that you can run literally end-to-end data pipelines. For the transformation piece, what I've exciting is that you are not only running the transformation part, but also on the back of that, end user communication, lifecycle marketing, pushing data into the semantic layer so that it can be served through both internal reporting, external reporting, or in-app dashboard. It just means that data is not just related to like internal reporting use case, but it also becomes part of your product and user experience as well. It's part of your activation sequence, it's part of your in-app product experience, and it's also part of your internal culture or internal reporting use cases.
Totally, yeah. I think it's, for us, and I think for most of the team, really, it's, you want those things to be in one single place, ideally, right? You don't want to having to hook up so many different things together. Like another thing that I'm also like launching now is to use our Hex integration, so that on the back of that specific run, as soon as the run completes, then the related dashboard to that pipeline, they also update right away internally, right? And on the back of that, I can send an alert through the sales channel and say, hey, look, we calculated this, sales revenue and whichever metrics we want to calculate, and we can make sure then the person in sales or in marketing, they go and they access the dashboard when they know then it's actually live and updated with the most recent data that we want to provide. So again, super easy. We just provide a project ID in from Hex within Bolt, and then that goes right. So they can receive alert, for example, it's like, hey, today's data has been updated. Right? Go and make this call so we can close more deals, type of thing. So to wrap it up, basically, it's like, okay, what are we actually powering with this pipeline? So we have these customer dashboards that we are ultimately embedded analytics within our application. Project intelligence to handle, like, help teams and know like what's working, what is not working, where to invest time and resources for the internal teams when using the product. It allows us, what you just say, to run those kind of like activation campaign directly using the relevant data. Okay. But also it allows our own internal reporting, right? So I want to be able to understand, okay, people are using the product, it's great, but how they're using it, right? What kind of AI features, what are they actually using with Dynamo AI? What are they actually doing with it, right? Okay, I can see that they're spending X amount of credit, but I want to know what kind of use cases they're trying to cover there. So the last couple of slides now are on, okay, what we will do different, if I have to reflect on things, is that, or what we'll suggest to look into if somebody's kind of like starting on this journey, is, I think over time, I've been working data for some time now, is that batch works. Reality is that batch processing, it works in most cases or in a lot of cases, right? So use real time for when it's worth it, because most analytics don't need it.
I always give the example, if your ingestion is not real time, what is real time? If you're not ingesting data in real time, even if you're ingesting data in real time over a Kafka stream or something like that, if your end user is not going to log into the product and keep refreshing at the same time, then what's the point of it?
It is just it just adds a lot of complexity, and in a lot of cases, at least, it's just not necessary. So just don't use it if you can. So this one, I guess, particularly with AI, we're seeing a lot of APIs and things like that. There's a lot of infrastructure behind it. In our case, it's BigQuery, but Snowflake and Databricks use similar things. So I can see that a lot of these, data was provided. They're really making it easier, a lot easier to build AI pipeline or driven pipeline and AI application within those tools. In most cases, that's probably a lot. It helps you already a lot with it. So try not to build your own ML infrastructure unless you really need to. And then, semantic layer is non-negotiable when you want to expose data externally because you really want to have something consistent that can be reused, just in our case, Cube. And really, observability is key, particularly if you want to expose data to external user in there. And try to use AI as much as possible. In all these things, I did still wrote some SQL and things like that. But using that AI, I was actually able, Cube was a very important thing because they have their own semantics, they have their own syntax. And it's not necessarily the things you want to learn from the point to write metrics and dimensions there. So using the AI, our products were able to just give it as context a bunch of SQLs. This is the dimensions and metrics I want to build. Just output from me the file, which is going to be the Cube file or the set of views that I want in there. So I don't have to collect up that module. So to wrap up, I think a few things that people then want to build similar pipeline is start really by the problem. I think this has been stressed out in many use scenarios by many people, but what are you trying to get with this data? For us was we want to get data so that we can power Intel for our end user. That was the main thing we wanted to solve. And then we walk backward from that. How can we do this as fast as possible? Use cloud tools if you can. If you have budget, I guess, it's also a part of it. Try and not to build everything in-house, right? There's a lot of time you can save sometimes. Everything we showed. Semantically, it's very important. As I said, but processing, it's cheaper and it just works. Try and use open source framework if possible, and always keep in mind what observability from that point onwards, and how you can keep an eye basically on how your end user are experiencing your data product. End user, it could be a combination of sales team or marketing team or embedded analytics within the product. Doesn't matter. You still, as a data team, you still have to serve them, and you have what to sort of keep an eye on this experience as well. So yeah, that's it's been a fun journey, I have to say. I was able to touch on many different things to build this data pipeline. So it's definitely been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think for me, what's exciting here is that pipelines are becoming more versatile and diverse. It's not just bronze, silver, gold, transforming data through a medallion architecture. There is so much advanced and applied applications of pipelines that are coming up as product experiences are evolving as well. And the fact that we are able to drive every company, every user nowadays companies want to let their users know how they're using the product. Users want to know how they're using the product so that they can justify investing in a certain product as well, which means that just having a naive transformation pipeline is no longer enough, but being able to couple data pipelines with data applications, I think, is the key here. That the lines between how the data is being consumed and transformed and how it is being consumed and used at various other places within an organization is just changing rapidly. Yeah, this is great. I was personally super excited as well to see how all of it came together, and the fact that we were using Bolt to orchestrate all of it together in a single place, I think was a fantastic outcome and a great use case for sure.
And I think adding to that also, dashboards are useful, of course, but I think in this new world, people have even less attention. So we really have to think about how do we give this information back to this end user. We want to have charts. We want to, give the ability to people to drill down and doing all these things, which don't make sense. But we also need to be able to provide this data in a way which it can be consumed at a glance super quickly. I don't have to go into detail all the time. So I think AI has a pretty strong use case for helping those experiences.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we've come to a close on this edition of the Paradigm live stream. We should be back next week with another edition. We will explore some other more fun use cases as well. But yeah, thanks a lot for joining. Thanks, Fabio, for making time. And this was fantastic. And happy Thanksgiving to all our US viewers and listeners. And yeah, until the next episode, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day, evening, wherever you are.